Greetings, all you 2021 people out there. It's now 2021 in the boot. This is the Long in the Boot podcast. I'm your host, G Long.
And I'm here as moral support again.
Moral support?
I'm D Long.
The lovely Deborah sitting across from me on the co-pilot's microphone.
Yeah, because Habs once again.
Well, we're kind of just, just kind of laying low while we wait to see what this COVID thing's going to do. If you'd like to reach Long in the Boot, obviously you can do it by email at longintheboot@gmail.com. And you can also call 337-502-9011 with any kind of message you'd like to leave. I don't even care. Say whatever you want. You can even cuss on that. Really? I don't mind. Yeah. Foul language is fine.
Yes,
no, I don't. Well, I can cuss. I could do it.
Oh, we know we can.
But, I'm good at it. But I don't want to if I don't have to because
it's not necessary.
Well,
here.
then you got to put the explicit language thing on the.
Yeah.
It's
but
a
if
hassle.
Somebody's listening in the car and they have their child with them.
Right.
Although I guess our kids heard.
Yeah. Well, and look how they turned out.
No comment.
My
kids are wonderful people.
Obviously a podcast based right here in the heel of the boot of Southwest Louisiana.
Yes.
And we can all agree 2020. Oh, man, what a year.
I think the heel has experienced a stone.
Somebody's got a rock in their shoe.
We definitely have a rock in our shoe.
Had it for a while. Just some of the fun highlights of 2020, besides the obvious ones. We had the Australian bushfires estimated to have killed 500 million animals.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that was a big one. We had the impeachment fiasco. That was fun there in December. Of last year that kind of went into the pandemic. It went over the beginning. So as we were going into 2020, we were doing impeachment stuff.
It's a distant memory.
We had the killing of George Floyd complete with video.
Yeah.
Of basically an 8-minute murder.
Yeah.
That was, of course, then led to riots in major U.S. cities across the nation. And it wasn't just George Floyd. There was several people that were
a whole lot of
several Black Americans who were killed in very strange.
It was the culmination of decades of
Breonna Taylor, another innocent whose life was taken for no good reason whatsoever.
No, not really.
An innocent, and there were others, and it's not much more to be said about that. Hopefully, we can not see that much anymore, but it seems to keep happening.
Yeah.
We have, what did we have? We had the murder hornets. They showed up in Washington State.
Yes.
We had the Hong Kong protests with the Hong Kong crackdown. We had the big discussion, weirdly enough, in the news when Andrew Cuomo came on TV one time wearing a certain shirt. Suddenly, the question of whether or not Andrew Cuomo had his nipples pierced was in the news.
And that mystery was solved.
Apparently it was solved. Yes. The governor of New York, that old guy.
We all know he wasn't always old. And, really, that's just an unfortunate bit of information I could have lived without.
Well, I know. And that probably explains all the leather suits he has hanging on the wall at home.
Do you know this? Fact checker, where are you?
Well, that's what I hear. Anyway, there was an interesting story about the Bolivian orchestra that was in a castle that got surrounded by wolves and they were trapped. They couldn't get out for a while.
Okay.
We had Carol Baskin on Dancing with the Stars. God, that may be the worst thing of 2020.
I don't know she doesn't have any Elvis in her.
Yeah, no. But she did have a pretty good year because they still haven't found any proof that she fed her husband to tigers, which we all know she did.
She must have her own iron constitution. That woman.
Another big moment that's on video is Trump's Bible op, where he had the police
and he had the Bible upside down,
and he held it up, and he didn't open it because he wouldn't know what to do with it if he opened it anyway. But that's
your opinion, sir.
It's my opinion of observing a man for 40 years. And finally, of course, we have the pandemic. With COVID and all that. And then finally, here in the heel of the boot, we had the joy of having not one, but 2 hurricanes. And we are still kind of reeling from that.
Yeah, that's going to be a while.
Yeah, we're gonna be a long while.
One year never just ends and the next starts up. It's always a crossover. Just like decades. You one decade doesn't just end at the end.
No, but it certainly has made Rita a distant memory.
Yeah, well, it in comparison, it helps us go, well, Rita wasn't all that bad.
Rita wasn't that bad.
No, Rita wasn't all that
Practically
bad.
a tickle in comparison. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so
Move
that's
your lower half of your sheetrock and redo your floors and carpet and get new furniture, and you'll probably be all right. But when the roof goes, that is a whole nother matter.
Yeah.
Or a wall a roof.
Or your trees.
Or your neighbor's metal shed ends up in your, it's just, nobody got by unscathed here.
But it was a boom for trampoline manufacturers because they have to replace all the trampolines that went sailing down the road.
They don't have to.
They seem to, though.
I know. Yeah.
And, of course, last night, New Year's Eve, I thought, well, there won't be any fireworks. Wrong.
No, there was so much wind and rain. I thought for sure they'd stay in.
Well, it's good to see people spending that $600 on something useful.
I'm
Fireworks.
Not even sure our neighbors have gainful employment, but apparently they've got enough to buy.
They've been running their house off a generator, but they were able to have fireworks.
Plenty of them, enough to make us take the dogs to bed with us because one of our two just can't handle the noise.
No, it's too much, and the barking is god awful.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's 2020 in a nutshell, and I'm sure there was lots of other bad stuff that happened because 2020, and we're in a surge going into 2021. So we're not starting well.
No, not as far as the numbers go.
It did get me thinking about, I've been hearing a lot of people, say 2020 is the worst year in history. And that might be true for.
Well, maybe in your personal memory.
In your world.
Yes.
Is 2020 the worst year in history? I'm going to go ahead and say no.
No.
And I started looking at other years that were considered at the time to be the worst year in history. And
you were there.
There were a bunch. Obviously, when the Roman Empire fell, those people probably thought, it's a bad year.
Yeah, they probably.
When the barbarians were killing a person's entire family in front of their eyes, they probably thought, this year could have been better.
Mm-hmm.
And the Black Plague, when it came through in the 1300s, I am sure that as the guy hauling the cart with all the bodies on it,
to bring out your dead. Yes.
He was probably going, I wasn't expecting this year to be quite so bad. But in fact,
actually for him, wasn't it a boon?
I guess it was. New business.
New business.
I've got a new business.
Well, wait, does he get paid for picking up bodies or is it a public service?
Well, yeah, you had to. I think he did get paid.
Yeah. And
then the question, of course, is where did they go? Did they just dump in a big pit, or did they use them for some other purpose?
Oh, pit.
Because probably.
Yeah, pit outside of town.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well.
I hope it was a pit.
I hope it was a pit.
I hope they didn't take them to like the tannery and just render them down into something to make leather.
Soylent Green.
Yeah, little crackers. Anyway, but I came across finally the thing that stuck out for me that at least reasonably close to our time. I mean, we could say the Depression was a bad time, and obviously the world wars were bad. Those were bad years. But it's the year of 1815 and 1816. Actually, I guess it's 2 years.
Yeah, again, a crossover.
1816 is the year that was affected. What actually caused 1816 to be one of the worst years in history started in 1815, but it took a little while to kind of unfold. So just always kind of my theory is always once you get away from something, get some time, you can look at and see that maybe what's happening now is not as bad as it could be.
Yeah. No.
There's
always somebody worse off. There's always something worse. So in measurement terms, it makes you feel better?
I guess. I don't know if it makes you feel better. It makes you appreciate
what you have more.
What you have. And it should also kind of let you know that it could be much worse.
Well, I think we recognize that, and we've all just been kind of waiting for the much worse.
I don't know. I think some people don't. I think a lot of people who don't really look at history kind of just only view the now.
They don't. The bubble of now.
You've got to take more of a big picture. You've got to step back and kind of open up the lens a little bit and look around, because I can see where you might say, man, this is horrible. I can't imagine. Well, yeah, but if you read any history at all, you can pretty quickly realize that
it's been
2020 is a bad year, but there's been a bunch of worse. And
yet all the people that it took to get you here and be alive for 2020 survived that.
Survived.
Yeah. They survived that.
They survived all of them. Every bad year in history that could have wiped you out with one missed coupling.
Exactly.
Didn't happen.
And we have had a lot of coupling during this past year. So that will result in a...
Have we?
There have been a lot of couplings, yes.
You think so?
My Facebook is full of pregnant girls.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There are going to be babies galore.
You think?
They're all wedded. Yes. What?
I don't know.
Quarantine keeps people locked up.
But I don't know. Well, there might be a lot of babies, but I don't know if it's going to keep up with the...
with the death rate?
Yeah. I was just reading a minute ago looking at numbers, and it is kind of weird that the number of estimated people who have died this year is actually right at the same level as last year. And, I would have thought, well, all these COVID deaths would be on top of who would have died normally. But now to me, at least, it's starting to look like the COVID deaths simply kind of, I guess, sped up.
Or they say COVID related death. So you probably had something else that could have killed you, but COVID sped it up.
Yeah, something. But I would have at least expected, 100,000, 200,000 more
than the average.
Because we lose, on average, this past year before COVID, we were losing 8,000 a day.
Okay.
Just on an average
across
day.
the country?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 8,000 a day. And judging from what I just read, this year we lost about 8,000 a day total.
But they're all in the hospital.
No, they're not. That's the weird thing.
Well, that's what I'm curious then. Why are the hospitals full and overrun if it's the same number? Something has changed.
Well, I'm not saying that there aren't hospitals that are packed and overrun, but I also don't know how this all plays out. Like I know in some states, hospitals can't add ICU beds without good reason because it would involve crossing like a territory with another hospital. And states... And I'll speak about Washington State because I know how that works. You have to get approval to increase the number of ICU beds in your hospital. And it's a process. It takes time. And if it looks like you would take patients from another jurisdiction, most of the time they tell you no.
So they're like unionized? They have territory?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I don't know. I don't know. Is everybody in the ICU, every single person got COVID? I would hope that there'd be people in there. Well, not hope. I don't know how you say it, but I would hope there'd be people in there that have like heart problems, cancer.
Well, again, but then if they die and they tested positive for COVID, we know that is also deemed a COVID related death. I mean,
right. And so it's all hinky. The test thing.
Basically, we've all become suspect of everything that we're being told.
Right. And none of us are experts, and even the experts don't seem to know anything. We got Fauci this week admitting he's been lying all the time about what it would take to get herd immunity. He said it. I'm not lying. He actually said it. Yeah, I lied. Yeah. Oh, he said, I moved the goalposts. Yeah, that's called lying. Nice.
All right. So
anyway,
what about this 1815?
1815. Everything's...
Who tried to kill who?
Well, it turns out that the Earth tried to kill us.
Oh, Mother Nature again.
Yeah, you know how she is. And
rearing her ugly head again.
Yeah, there's a volcano out in Indonesia called Mount Tambora. It actually used to be about a third higher than it is now.
Fact checker says it's not.
Well, she's wrong in this case. And it was a dormant volcano up until about 1812 when it started to rumble. And everybody went, well, it's rumbling. No big deal. A little rumble. What can it hurt?
Yeah.
And it continued rumbling up until April 5th, 1815.
April 5th. All right.
In 1815, April 5th of 1815, it exploded with a sound that was so loud that it was heard 1,600 miles away.
Wow. Who documented that 1,600 miles away?
Lots of people documented it because all of the European powers had colonies in that part of the world.
Okay.
So there were a lot of people that noticed it. A good example is there was a British officer who was about 600 miles away The first explosions we heard on this island in the evening of April 5th were noticed in every quarter and continued at intervals until the following day.
Oh, wow.
The noise was, in the first instance, almost universally attributed to distant cannon fire. So much so that a detachment of troops was marched in the belief that a neighboring post was being attacked, and along with the coast, boats were in 2 instances dispatched in quest of supposed ships in distress.
So they armed up, getting ready to go back and
They
fight.
thought they were going to war.
Oh, wow.
And apparently these explosions continued over several days, and then the ash and the pumice began to fall.
Ew.
Pumice being the little teeny tiny rocks that we
that we all bring together into a little bar form so that ladies can exfoliate their feet.
Correct. It fell, the original pumice fell in an area 3,200 miles across.
Wow.
And at the closest to the volcano, 50 centimeters deep, which is 30 inches.
Wow. Okay.
And 3,200 miles away, it was about an inch deep. Little rocks.
Tiny rocks.
Everywhere. And the ash began falling, and it actually fell over a larger area, little flakes of ash. But more importantly, when the volcano exploded, it sent up aerosol particles, aerosolized particles into the sky, high up into the atmosphere.
I wonder what the people that far away thought. They must have just been flipping out.
Well, apparently, as far away as 1,000 miles, they could smell it. And it was they called it a nitrous odor, which sulfurous is the best description of it. And they called it an ash veil. And it was, they described the rain that began falling as tephra tinged, which is a yellowish reddish.
Ew.
Yeah. So
Well,
nasty.
that must have been a little disturbing for people who were uncertain of what was going on. At least we get instant information about what's happened or what is happening, and we can make sense of it, but they must have been confused.
I'm sure they were. An estimated 41 cubic kilometers of stuff was ejected, which would weigh today about 10 billion tons.
Like our debris.
Yes. It left a caldera measuring 5 miles across the top of the mountain. And before the mountain, it was 1,400 feet tall. After the explosion, it was 9,000 feet tall. It lost 5,000 feet from the explosion. And that's a big explosion.
That's a big explosion, and it had to go somewhere.
Everything I read said it was 10 times the magnitude of Mount St. Helens.
Wow.
Yeah. And the area that it covered with ash at the beginning would have covered the entire western United States from the Rockies all the way to the Pacific.
So how does something of that magnitude affect weather and...
Well, that's kind of the fun of this thing.
The people, the environment.
You kind of have to track it from where it happened
out
because it takes time to work its magic.
And why would that have caused the worst year? Why?
Well,
do tell, Glenn.
First, let's just talk about the area where it happened, the Indonesian region.
In their vicinity.
Right. 100,000 deaths, 40,000 almost instantly.
Okay.
Ensuing tsunamis would have devastated islands, so we don't know how many people were lost there because they just wouldn't have had records.
You wouldn't have had records. You wouldn't have counted them. No. It wasn't like Galveston where you actually had people coming along and documenting.
Most of the documentation comes from British, Dutch, and Spanish, Portuguese colonies and stations and describing it. Immediately after, a lieutenant who was with the Army detachment that had been sent out when hearing the explosions, he wrote in his memoirs, "On my trip towards the western part of the island, I passed through nearly the whole of the island. The extreme misery to which the inhabitants have been reduced is shocking to behold. There were still on the roadside the remains of countless corpses and the marks of where many others had been interred. The villages were almost entirely deserted and the houses fallen in. They had collapsed because of the weight of the pumice.
Yeah.
The surviving inhabitants had dispersed in search of food. Since the eruption, a violent diarrhea has prevailed in the area, which has carried off huge numbers of people. It is supposed by the natives to have been caused by drinking water, which had been impregnated with the ashes. And horses have also died in great numbers from a similar complaint. And what they were seeing was the beginnings of a typhus epidemic.
Oh.
And it caused typhus to run rampant. Within a very short amount of time, 100,000 estimated to be dead from starvation, dehydration, and all the other fun things that come with basically this kind of event. So in that area, that happened almost immediately, but that was 1815.
Yeah.
Well, then 1816 rolls around, and by then, all of the aerosolized sulfur particles were up high in the atmosphere.
Okay.
And that began the year known as 1800 and froze to death.
That was the headline.
Well, it was later.
Yeah, but they didn't realize it yet.
And it's really 1816 is the worst year, but it lasted for 2 years after that.
So, okay.
But anywhere in the world in 1816, it meant you were hungry. Didn't matter where you went. Across the globe, harvests perished in frost and drought and were washed away by flooding rains. This cloud of aerosolized sulfur blotted out the sun.
Oh, so they didn't have spring?
Not only did they not have spring, they didn't have summer. And I'll get to that in just a second.
So they planted their crops like normal, thinking that spring was going to happen, and they
get them in the ground at the beginning of spring. And you think, okay,
and we might have a late freeze or something.
Sure,
but that didn't occur.
First of all, the entire world, for the most part, depended on subsistence agriculture for survival. The vast majority of people lived harvest to harvest.
Yeah.
It's like paycheck to paycheck now. If you missed a harvest, you were screwed. And there were no safety nets. Not really.
And nobody's coming to feed you.
And
for us, it's the trucks. If the trucks don't come, we live truck to truck.
The ensuing famine that's going to come from this was actually already begun during the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. 1815 was the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Finally, people could get back to farming and planting.
We're going to have normal again.
It's going to be normal. We're going back to normal. Oh, yay. And then boom, this happens. And
in seemingly a small region of the world that shouldn't have affected everybody.
Yeah. Who would have known? And so you get these stories coming out of all of this that are really crazy. In Europe, for example, in Europe, you had desperate times. Crops failed in the ground. Wheat wouldn't grow. Oats wouldn't grow. It was cold throughout. The Thames River actually froze in London, which never happened. And they had riots in cities across Europe. And, of course, the friends of famine, known as cholera and typhus, began stalking the globe. And, in fact, there was a cholera and typhus epidemic that covered the map from India all the way across Europe and the Middle East. Typhus and cholera killed countless tens of thousands of people.
And they just died in their homes and in the streets.
They just died. Yeah. And, of course, most of these people were poor.
Yeah.
We have no record of them. We just have to estimate. And so we don't really know how many millions of people died from this one
So
volcano.
You mean they weren't getting daily updates on
No,
the
they didn't have the handy evening news. The Germans had riots all over the place. In fact, so many horses had to be put down that horse meat became a staple for diets for a lot of people. Wow. And it, in fact, led one German to develop the prototype of the first bicycle for transportation.
Oh, because they had no horses.
The velocipede. Yeah, I mean, it was that bad. There were the horses, they couldn't feed them. Yeah. If you had oats, you certainly didn't give them to your horse. You weren't giving them
to the horse if you needed to eat.
And this entire situation happened in Ireland. It happened in Britain. It didn't matter where you went in Europe. Famine was there. And of course, it's going to affect the United States as well.
Well, first off, I would think a lot of those people would have tried to come to the States.
Well, it did cause that. That's the beginning of European migration.
Yeah, to the
voluntary European migration.
Yeah.
But I was also surprised reading about the British and their reaction to this, because they had so many riots and so many problems. Criminals were rounded up and shipped to the colonies. And many of them came to the U.S., or I say the colonies. By then, we were a country.
Yeah.
But they were still shipped. What they were done was they were shipped to Canada. And then, of course, many of them made their way across.
Made their way down here.
Sure.
And, all ended up in Georgia.
And then lots of British people ended up being sent to Australia as well. Criminals.
Yeah.
You know, the weather in the United States was absolutely nuts, just like it was everywhere else. I have let me pull up my happy information here.
Why is it happy?
Because there's these woodcuts of people looking all sad and miserable, and they're very cute.
All right.
Temperatures dropped to as low as 40 degrees in July and August in Connecticut, for instance, where in July and August, it's not normally 40 degrees. This is also known in the Northeast for a long time as the poverty year.
Oh, yeah.
Crop failures across the United States. And at this time, by the way, the United States pretty much consists of everything east of the Appalachians. They really haven't started moving west yet. This is going to cause them to do that. People moved from states like Maine and Vermont, New York, New Hampshire, all those eastern states that had really cold weather in 1816. During that summer, they began moving west and began settling the upper Midwest, states like Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Assuming that
Ohio.
It was going to get better there, it would be better.
They expected the weather to get warmer, and they expected to have better fertile soil, which in fact they did. That's one of those weird kind of things. But it also changed the direction of the government, too, for getting those areas settled and expanding the size of the United States.
Representation, because now they have population.
Now, it says, to this day, scientists don't agree on what caused the bizarre weather. Well,
it was a little earthquake.
It was aerosolized particles in the atmosphere is, in fact, what it was.
It caused changes.
But this article was written quite some time ago. Science got a better handle on it now.
Oh, okay.
There were warm days. There were some warm days. But the problem was the cold snaps kept happening. And one example is from the Farmer's Almanac. April 24th, it is 74 degrees.
All right.
Normal. 30 hours later, on April 25th, it is 21 degrees.
Oh, man. So, there's really no time to get a crop in the ground.
A 55-degree drop. I mean, you're talking 21 degrees, that's hard freeze. And if you've got fresh crops in the ground in April, which you would,
it's not.
They're done.
Yeah.
And they started noticing, you started seeing these people in their diaries saying the vegetation does not seem to advance at all. On May 12th, freezing temperatures from Canada killed buds on fruit trees across the country. They lost huge numbers of fruit trees in Canada. They had, in May, they had ice so thick in upstate New York and Maine that you could skate on it.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of May, a hard freeze came and destroyed corn crops across the Northeast. 6 inches of snow fell on June the 6th across New England.
Freakish weather.
Freakish isn't even the word.
Yeah.
You got these guys, another guy who named Chauncey, who he was talking about how he had to go to work wearing heavy woolen clothes and mittens in July.
In July. Wow.
So in fact, in Boston, Massachusetts, they had the 18 inches of snow in June. Birds, and this is my favorite, frozen birds dropping from trees.
Oh, my God.
Some Vermont farmers who had already shorn their sheep for the spring tried to tie their fleeces back on, but most froze to death anyway.
Oh.
Little naked sheep freezing to death. That's so sad.
That is sad.
And, of course, then besides all the snow and ice, rain. And apparently it rained constantly. But one of the weirdest things that they talk about in here is the dry fog. The fog dimmed the sun so much that people report they could look at the sun with the naked eye.
Wow.
And actually make out sunspots on the surface of the sun.
It's like a Stephen King story.
Yeah, it would have been
freakish.
Terrifying. All of this was caused by aerolized sulfur, and it basically just blankets the...
Yeah, but they didn't know that. They would have assumed it was the end times, I would guess.
Oh, by the way, just for fun, I should point out that China is experimenting with controlling the weather using aerosolized sulfur in the atmosphere. That's a fact. Look it up, kids.
Okay, and they'll discover it works in 2021.
In the United States, June 22nd, and here's a weird one. June 22nd, temperatures reached 101 degrees in Salem, Massachusetts. Well, there you go.
That's normal.
That's normal. 3 days later, it was 30 degrees.
Oh, my God.
But July 4th was cool. Chauncey wrote that it was hard to feel patriotic while watching men play in overcoats.
Oh,
Then a northwest wind brought a 3-day cold spell, and the temperature dropped 40 degrees. Boom.
well, that is very similar to Louisiana weather, though. We would all agree here that, yeah, one day we're in shorts and flip-flops sweating our butts off, and
Now, besides all the crops...
next 12 hours later, we're freezing.
Yeah. But besides all the crops failing, that means the animals are going to fail.
Yeah.
Because you got nothing to feed them.
Can't feed them.
And these are, again, mostly subsistence farmers. And so you had whole families that were starving. And guess what? Famine shows up. Typhus and cholera show up with it.
As well.
And that began happening across the United States.
Well, across the world.
Now, here's what's weird. When the rain stopped, it stopped for really long periods of time.
Oh, now we have drought.
It goes back and forth. Massive drought and then massive flooding.
Yeah.
And, of course, then you've got the problems of probably trees falling over. We should all
loose
understand
soil
that.
And landslides, mudslides, and
now, of course, many people in the United States believe they understood exactly what was going on, that it was God's judgment.
Oh, sure.
Because, God's judgment. New Hampshire Governor William Plummer believed the weather was God's judgment on the earth and urged people to humble themselves for their transgressions. Yeah.
well, we're blamed for the COVID spread. I mean,
and every time the temperatures would warm up, everybody would breathe a sigh of relief, think that it was over. So in early August, when farmers start thinking about planting those fall crops, they had a hard frost in the first week of August.
To let them know not to do that. Don't you dare go out there and plant.
Again, crops are going to fail. It got too cold too fast. Nothing grew. And in fact, one of the things I found very interesting was most trees in New England that still exist from that time period, there is zero growth between rings for the years.
For like 1816, 1817.
Experts can't tell. They can't, there's like not a ring there that should be there for that year.
Malnutrition essentially for them.
The trees were they didn't get any sun.
Yeah, they didn't get any sun.
So zero tree growth. Isn't that weird?
No, it's sad. It's all sad.
Well, it is. It's all very sad, and
it must have been very confusing for them.
And we can't really understand what must have been going through the minds of these people because they didn't. First of all, no news.
Yeah.
They had many of them probably had no idea that a volcano had gone off on the other side of the planet.
And you just keep thinking that the weather's going to improve. So now we're in August. We're going to go into the winter,
right?
Having never gotten out of the winter,
and they didn't.
And there's no food in the storehouses, and
the price of food.
Oh yeah.
Also, you have to remember too. This is a time when you had to have actual coin.
To
buy things.
No credit.
No credit.
And no stimulus package. So $600 would have done those people a world of good.
Oh, yeah. That would have. Oh, absolutely.
Unlike today.
The fact is that nobody had ever experienced anything like this in memory for those people.
Yeah.
And nobody knew what to do. One of the things, luckily, I was reading about one farmer. He had decided to start trying to plant rye. And apparently rye is very hardy to cold temperatures. And he was able to save his family and his neighbors
with
rye.
Okay.
And in fact, he was so well thought of in New Hampshire. Reuben Whitten is his name. When he died in 1847, all of his neighbors paid for a gravestone and erected a monument that read, "A pioneer of this town, cold season of 1816, raised 40 bushels of rye on this land, which kept his family and neighbors from starvation."
Wow.
So, I mean, that's saying something.
Well, and that shows you the ingenuity. I mean, at some point you have to come around to the positive things that came out of something so tragic. I mean,
yeah,
we do have positives that have come out of this last year. It has changed the structure of society. Obviously, things had to change for the world at that time too. So,
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it even changed nature. Certain fish, certain animals kind of disappeared in that region for quite some time. It was reported that raccoons, rabbits, squirrels, hedgehogs had all vanished from the land. Wow. People were eating them.
Yeah.
Mackerel, the fish, was fished out. Many of the places that had mackerel were completely fished out. Even pigeons, which were everywhere, were very sparse.
Suddenly disappeared.
They were very sparse.
You're not sending a message to anybody.
In September of that year, it got so cold that apples on the trees froze solid. They were eating nettles.
Ew.
There you go.
Oh.
Nettles.
Yeah, that is pretty bad.
Yeah. But much like today, there is one really interesting side note to this, which kind of surprised me, but then again, maybe not. The year without summer was great for maple syrup producers. Apparently the trees produced syrup year round that year. Because it stayed cold.
Yeah, because it stayed cold.
And what allowed the people not to starve to death that had maple syrup is they traded it for mackerel, which might explain what happened to all the mackerel.
Yeah. So syrup on mackerel, is that a good dish?
Yeah. You might think, well, what about Congress? Certainly Congress would have done something to help the people of the United States at this time. After all, much smaller country. They were closer to the people, right?
Yeah.
Members of Congress seemed insensitive to the suffering of the people. Huh.
Wow.
That's weird. Not like today.
Not like today, exactly.
And they voted to double their salary.
They doubled it?
They doubled their salary.
We're not even going to play around. We're just going to double it?
They doubled their own salary.
Okay. Well, did the people send them a message when
it turns out, even without the news, that got out. That word got out. Didn't go over too well. 70% of U.S. representatives were voted out of office the very next election.
Hallelujah.
Including Daniel Webster.
Really?
Yeah.
He voted himself in.
He sure did.
So the 30% that didn't get voted out were the ones who didn't vote for the raise, I guess.
They're probably Southerners, because this apparently in the South, it affected the South too, but mostly in the form of rain.
Yeah.
It didn't destroy the crops, but it did cause problems.
Yeah.
Some mass flooding and things like that.
Oh, Michelle, we're used to that.
But a side note from all of this, though, Josiah Miggs was the commissioner of the land offices in the U.S. government at that time, and he ordered that a more systematic approach to observing weather phenomenon begin.
Oh.
And he ordered that the 20 land offices in the United States begin taking thrice daily recordings of temperature, wind, and precipitation, which was the beginnings of keeping track of weather on a scientific basis. And
which you get a lot more of if you read Isaac Storm for the Galveston hurricane. Obviously,
people here we didn't have the problem with riots that they had in Europe in cities, because in Europe you had cities that depended on the agriculture to keep them alive.
Yeah.
In the United States, there weren't any cities to speak of. There were larger townships. New York was a city, but it wasn't.
Centuries of growth.
Yeah. I mean, you even the largest city, New York or Philadelphia, you didn't have to go hardly at all out of town to see farmland everywhere. So it wasn't like Europe.
Yeah.
In Europe, you had major cities.
Sure.
And they couldn't be provided with their sustenance, and it caused problems and riots. But it also caused Britain to begin forming a public health department. And it's the beginning of organized health services.
Yeah.
In England. So it does change society, as any year of craziness does.
Yeah, so, when there's a crisis, people look to solving that crisis and what can we do better next time? Just like what they said with Rita. Rita taught us so much about what was going to be necessary in the aftermath, and we made changes. People were allowed to come back to their homes this time. When they asked to evacuate and people were told you will be allowed back in,
they left.
They left this time.
And it was good to leave.
It was definitely good to leave.
It was good to leave. And I'll wrap this up with the year of 1816 by talking about somebody who had visited the Northeast, and after the first summer into the fall, and people were becoming desperate. And this man by the name of Samuel Goodrich wrote, "At last a kind of despair has seized upon the people. In the pressure of adversity, many people have lost their judgment, and thousands fear or felt that New England was destined henceforth to become part of a new frigid zone." In other words, they lost their judgment and believed that this would be the way it was going to be always.
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit familiar, people losing their judgment. The fact is that other things were blamed for this too, by the way. Many people blamed Benjamin Franklin's lightning rod experiments for changing the weather. He had done it years before.
You're going to grasp at anything, and if the lightning rod is there, you're going to grasp at that.
The big one was, of course, the wrath of God.
Yes,
that was the one that really
Well, because it's all encompassing. It covers everything.
Yeah. But anyway, and so, 2020, it's bad.
It's bad.
It could be so much worse.
Well, watching your family starve to death
watching your family,
not
just your family, but your entire livelihood.
Yeah, everybody.
And we do have, that's happening to people.
It is.
But in this time, at least at that time, it wasn't forced upon them by some entity like the government.
Yeah.
Which is what's happening today. We have a pandemic, we have this virus, but the people losing their livelihood and losing things they've built over many years.
It's not a result of the
the pandemic. It's a result of somebody in power saying, hey, you close your doors by order of me.
Yes. For the public health good.
Yeah, for the public good. But as it turns out, it hasn't made a difference. The fact is that if you look across this country, the places that most obeyed the rules, wore masks, stayed home, social distanced.
Oh, California.
California being a perfect example, have it worse than anywhere else when it comes to positive cases. Why is that?
Well, because we couldn't be like New Zealand.
Cut everything off.
Yeah, yeah.
The fact is that we were lied to over and over again. We kept getting information that countermanded previous information.
Yeah.
And
they made us more confused.
They made everybody more confused and more angry.
It makes you angry, exactly.
And caused people across this country to lose their businesses and the ability to support their own families. They imposed basically the things that Mother Nature caused to happen in 1815 and 1816. And now they've imposed that kind of stuff on people in America today. It's really kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, and across the world, it is global.
It is global.
Yeah.
And what's going to come of it?
Well, positive things. There were some positive things we discussed. Some of the changes that came out of that taught people, to do better next time and to come up with new inventions, to create new things to help, to
change and move
and be prepared for something like that. Yeah, move. Start again.
You had the beginnings of healthcare in Britain, government regulated healthcare, I guess.
I would assume we got art and literature out of all of that. We
did. Well, I'll wrap that up in just 1 second. So before we move on to the very end of this and the last thing I want to talk about, what do you think? Will we look back on 2020 in 10 or 15 years, 20 years, and see the good that came out of it, or will it all be bad?
No, we can't live like that. I don't think humans can stay in that frame of mind for, a long time. You have to,
because there's a lot of negativity out there.
Well, there is a lot of negativity. I noticed my Facebook got a little more positive though after the election.
Yeah, I guess mine did too.
It kind of shifted. We shifted to, other things.
Well, as time goes by and as I get, I guess closer to death, I kind of find myself more and more viewing the world as something that we really don't have any control.
Well, yeah.
Individually. We have control over our own actions.
The decisions we make.
To
leave
the ways we treat others.
To leave the hamburger patties in the freezer when we go camping.
Yeah. You know what? They stayed frozen.
They did.
It's a positive note. They didn't go bad.
And it was a good meal when we got home.
And we were treated by our neighbors.
with some other meat.
So that things
helped us out. Yeah.
Good things.
People will feed you now.
Yeah. They certainly will. The thing is, that's how I'm going to continue to look at 2020. As bad as it's been, I continually go back to thinking of those people coming out of the devastation of two hurricanes.
The year of,
and literally setting up tables and preparing food within 24 hours of a land being laid waste
and
by
knowing
wind.
What was necessary, what people needed. And now we're still trying to get houses for people. Now it's
housing.
Yeah.
One of the things we got out of the year of 1800 and froze to death was literature and art. If you go and get online and just find paintings produced by whoever, it doesn't really matter.
During that time frame, across
during
the
those
world.
3 years,
yeah.
You will see the most brilliant sunsets,
and
sunrises with lots of reds and yellows. That's real.
Yeah, because
that's what they were seeing.
Those colors and
yeah. And I thought that was really interesting.
That's what man does. We turn inward, we examine, and then we create.
That's true. We do. Something else that came out of that, though, was in literature, and I thought it was really interesting, so I definitely took it and wanted to hang on to it. But of course, now I've got to find it.
Well, those people had to go inside too.
They did. Three Brits.
Three Brits. Is this the beginning of a joke? 3 Brits walk into a bar.
Two men and a lady.
Is this pumice on the bar?
They first they went to Geneva. They were in Switzerland. And Switzerland suffered horribly during all of this because of rain. They were up in the mountains. Cold wasn't their problem. It was rain.
Oh, okay.
Lake Geneva flooded horribly. But staying in Geneva were the Shelleys along with Lord Byron. Mm-hmm. We won't get into their relationship. Clearly, it was obviously different.
It was a modern type of relationship.
It certainly was.
It's complicated.
As we know, Mary Shelley wrote the modern Prometheus. Frankenstein, but it's the modern Prometheus. That's the name.
Yes.
And Frankenstein's not the monster.
People. Jeopardy will not give you credit for that.
But one of the things that, as I was reading about this, I thought, I had never really thought about it, but Frankenstein seems to almost be the book to almost be sort of an allegory of what was going on in the world. They talk about once you remove the supernatural elements of the monster's creation and set that aside, the experiences of the creature embody the degradation and suffering of the homeless European poor. While the violent disgust of Frankenstein and everyone else towards him mirrors the utter want of sympathy shown by the most affluent Europeans towards the millions of climate victims suffering hunger, disease, and the loss of their homes and livelihoods. So the creature sort of represents almost like the forgotten poor.
Yeah, he's
treated horribly.
He's the archetype of all that.
And he's not a horrible person. He's not.
No.
But he also lashes out like the people of Europe do when they get hungry and are treated poorly. As the creature himself put it, I suffered first from the inclemency of the season, but still more from the barbarity of man. So maybe Shelley was onto something with her writing. Later, they went into Italy and were holed up again because of rain, lots and lots of rain. What does he say? Lord Byron says, it was a direful summer consisting of stupid mists, stupid fogs, stupid rains, and perpetual density.
Stupid 1816.
In that litany of poor weather, however, one depressing day stood out, a celebrated dark day on which the fowls went to roost at noon and the candles lighted as if it were midnight. Wow. And I'm going to leave you with what Lord Byron wrote. I won't read the whole thing, but the opening lines are more than enough to kind of give you an idea of what he might have been thinking about when he wrote them. The poem is by Lord Byron, George Gordon, if you want to look him up, but he's better known as Lord Byron. But he was talking about that day, and this is what he wrote. I had a dream, which was not all a dream. The bright sun was extinguished, and the stars did wander darkling in the eternal space. Rayless and pathless, and the icy earth swung blind and blackening in the moonless air. Morn came and brought no day. And men forgot their passions in the dread of this their desolation, and all hearts were chilled into a selfish prayer for light. There you go. That's his view of what was going on. And I think he nailed it. It's a beautiful poem, but it turns dark, which is a good name for a poem called Darkness.
Yeah, which is what they were living in.
There you go. So
the veil is going to be lifted. It's now 2021. We're going to find the light and come out of the darkness.
Yeah, we are. And that's the thing. We have to, because his poem had something else as well about the people who didn't
step out of the
darkness. And they did live by watchfires and the thrones and the palaces of crowned kings, and the huts and habitations of all things which dwell were burnt for beacons. Cities were consumed, and men were gathered round their blazing homes to look once more into each other's face. Yeah.
Humanity.
There you go.
Take care of your neighbor, people.
Take care of your neighbors. Take care of your loved ones. Give everybody big hugs. Have a wonderful and prosperous 2021. And we will catch you the next time right here at Long in the Boot. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.